Okay, so just to start, I wanted to say hi to everyone and thank you so much for joining our webinar today, wherever you may be in the world. And for those of you who don't know SALT, I wanted to introduce ourselves just before we introduce our fabulous speakers. So I'll give you a quick intro on us and why we feel it's important to have webinars like this. So SALT is a global digital recruitment agency. We have 11 offices across 8 different countries around the world. Our headquarters is in London and we arrived here in New York about 4 years ago and recently opened an office in Austin, Texas earlier this year. So our specialism is to find talent across sales, marketing, technology and creative fields, working with clients in the tech industry, anywhere from Series A startups to Fortune 500 companies. As a business, we are extremely passionate about D&I, not only internally, but also externally for our clients. We can commit to diversifying workforces and certainly believe in doing so. So really, really happy that all of you are here to celebrate Pride Month with us and talk about some poignant topics in a safe place around inclusion, which no doubt has been really tested in these current times during isolation and the BLM movement. So just to introduce myself, I'm Elizabeth Kayler. I head up our sales recruitment team at SALT, specializing in SaaS, fintech, and enterprise sales. I'm really proactive in hosting events like this, and some of you might have seen me at International Women's Day earlier this year. Also, and alongside that, we ran 5 miles at Pride in Central Park last year to raise money for Ali Forney, which my wonderful co-host can discuss. Bea, do you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute.
Thank you. I still haven't got used to unmuting myself. Anyway, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for everybody who has come along to join us today. So I'm Bea. I specialise in technology recruitment and I've worked with companies across the US in building specialist teams within AI, engineering and cloud. I've recently been lucky enough to move to Austin, where I'm launching our 11th office globally. I'm passionate about thought leadership events and of giving back to the communities that we work within, especially enabling our clients to build diverse and inclusive teams. Perfect. And then on housekeeping, just a couple of points on housekeeping. We are recording today's webinar, so please ensure that your mics are turned off. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter these into the public chat where we can have those answered for you. So today's event is free, but we also wanted to give our participants the opportunity to give back should they wish. SALT has worked closely with the Ali Forney Center, which is the largest LGBTQ homeless shelter in the US. We have been involved in fundraising events and also volunteering activities within the center's kitchen. This has enabled us to see firsthand the positive impacts that the centre has on protecting and empowering vulnerable youth. Ali Forney's mission is to provide young people housing and continued supportive services to help them thrive and prepare for independent living. Donations are greatly appreciated, and if anybody has any questions about the Ali Forney Centre, please don't hesitate to contact me after the webinar as well. Perfect. On to you, Elizabeth, with these speakers.
Thank you. And yeah, now to introduce our speakers, I'd love for you to kind of each go around. Dawn, if you'd like to start off and just introduce yourself and what you do, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, hi, I'm Dawn. I work as a software engineer in a company called Cobalt Music. We're based out of London, New York and LA primarily, although we have offices around the world. I founded and continue to lead the London Employee Resource Group for Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hello, Amy Gomez, SVP Diversity Strategy, Click Health. My pronouns are she, her, and I lead our cross-cultural marketing capability, helping all of our clients to communicate effectively with diverse consumers. And I also have some internal responsibilities supporting our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I'm very excited for this conversation.
Thank
Hi,
you.
I'm Hi, I'm Sean Frazier. I work at Viacom CBS for UA, user acquisition, and audience development for our paid marketing mobile apps and platforms. I've been here in New York City for about 2.5 years, having been raised in Dallas, Texas. And from there, I had a brief stint in Las Vegas, which is a very fun story that we'll share another time. Very happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Smith. I work for companies like Uber and BounceX, and currently serve as a diversity and inclusion consultant. I have a background in industrial organizational psychology, where we're doing research around the lack of diversity at the PhD level and the benefits of inclusive mentoring. I am really excited to be here and continue the conversation and represent Pride.
Hey everyone, I'm Danny. I use he, him pronouns. I have a background in tech, specifically UX and product consulting. I've been doing that for about 6 years, and I'm currently working on a master's degree in social work with the hope of kind of being more equipped to serve the communities that need support. Thanks, happy to be here. Oh, and Black Lives Matter.
Hi everyone, my name is Leanna. I don't use any pronouns, I just ask folks to use my first name. I'm a software engineer at Booz Allen Hamilton. Outside of Booz Allen, I do a ton of volunteer work with the LGBTQIA+ community. So I serve as the DC chapter head for Out in Tech, and I'm also the director of affinity groups for OSTEM. I do a fair amount of work around supporting LGBTQIA+ communities of color around issues of mental health and wellness, and I'm always working to diversify the tech field. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. B, do you want to kick off
Yes.
with? Fantastic.
Absolutely. So our first topic today will be discussing inclusivity and diversity within hiring. Danny, not to pick on you first, but what does it mean to you to be inclusive, and how do you apply that in the workplace?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I guess I think about inclusivity and diversity as kind of a set of values. I think these are values that people hold, that different companies can hold, organizations that come from the perspective that when you have a diverse group of people, that enhances our capacity to achieve any goal, really, that we're working towards. I think in order to actualize diversity and inclusion, it's really needs to start with the leadership of any given company or organization. I think in order to achieve these values, it's great to take a perspective of anti-oppressive practice, which means that we look at the ways that oppression functions in different organizations and spaces on an internal, individual, institutional, and ideological level, and that the leadership starts there with doing that work and then creating a culture and community that moves towards that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Laquan, what does it mean to you to be inclusive, and how do you apply that in the workplace?
So for me, it means to consider everyone when you are creating a product or whatever your organization is producing. I think that retention is a big word for me when I think about inclusiveness or inclusivity, just because, you know, you can always attract, you know, candidates, but keeping them is a measure of how inclusive your organization is. I think one way an organization can, a workplace can kind of apply this inclusiveness is through their benefits, right? So what type of benefits do they offer? Maybe tuition reimbursement, or covering mental health you know, costs, or even parental leave. Like, that's a way that you can be inclusive throughout your organization.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think also retention is definitely something that we discuss with our clients and see come up quite frequently as well during these initiatives too. If we look now at, and I'll come back to you again, Danny, what are some of the best practices that you feel could be applied for inclusivity?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It kind of plays back to sort of what I was speaking to previously. I think when folks within any given organization develop a strong sense of awareness around how they occupy space and the access that they have to different resources or like economic security, once there's an investigation of kind of how an individual is moving through the world and the ways that our identities either reinforce power dynamics or are moving away from existing power dynamics that are harmful, that's the best way to go. So on the internal level, like watch some documentaries about people that you don't identify with. Read books by folks that are outside of your circle, outside of your identification, and start there and really ask yourself how much personal connection you have to different communities, and then move towards policy from there and really create an environment where people are open and speak about the different ways that diversity enhances how we go about any kind of work, because it absolutely does. And then encourage people to do the same and make sure you're hiring a diverse group of folks.
Fantastic, great, thank you. And then Sean, what are some of the best practices for inclusivity that you have experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So at Viacom CBS, we have ERGs, which are Employee Resource Groups. And this isn't something that's just independent to Viacom. But I belong to three. We have a Black ERG, a LGBTQIA ERG, et cetera, et cetera. And as a best practice, I've always advocated the cross-pollination of these groups and teams, so internally and externally. So the Black affinity group interacting, networking with the LGBTQIA affinity group, just to build that sense of community and to Danny's point, to really build that awareness and build further advocacy for our broader, wider community.
Fantastic, thank you. And actually that's something we've recently ensured that we have community programs within our own teams globally as well. And we've seen a real impact and how that can bring people together as well. Fantastic. So the next question, Liana, I'll come across to you. What initiatives have you pioneered or been a part of that have been well received or very successful?
So a few years ago, I did a Exploring Gender Beyond the Binary training when I worked in blockchain, and I was able to deliver that globally. And what it did was it introduced employees to the ideas of exposing them to different genders, gender identities, having them not just like get exposed, but also work with the material. And I created a bunch of different exercises that they went through, and then we debriefed after each one. Most recently, I worked with OSEM to create a allyship in motion training, and what it was I have been a part of a lot of different diversity trainings and things like that, and a lot of them talk around the problem rather than talking to the problem. And so I worked with the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at OSEM, and we created what we called a very frank training, and it was based on it hit on a multitude of identities, race, sexuality, gender, and we had the audience really interact with the material. We didn't just talk at them, and there was even a part where we actually split the room by race when we went into a discussion on race, and we even asked them why they thought we did that. And so we had about 30 employers attend. It was at the OSEM National Conference, which happens in November. We had about 30 employers attend, and of the 30, I believe 27 gave us really positive feedback and said that they wanted to see a longer version of it. It was about a 4-hour training. So yeah, that's something that I've seen been very successful, and I want to see more trainings like that.
Thank you. And I like the kind of bravery of being frank as well. That's just something sometimes we just have to approach things straight on, and that enables us to kind of grow outside of that as well. Be a little bit uncomfortable, if you will. And then Laquan, the same question as well. So what initiatives have you pioneered or have you been a part of that have been well received or successful?
So last year at Bounce X for Pride, what we did was we do have 7 ERGs there, and one of them are Bounce Out. And so we asked some of the willing members of Bounce Out if they would share their coming out story. And so we would put that on a poster. It would be their face, their story, and then we would put that throughout the office. Obviously, with the pandemic going on, we can't do that this year. But, you know, there was stories about love. There were stories about being heard or not, you know, just a variety of different stories that touched a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And, you know, it showed that our office is in full support, like, even if you were coming to visit as a client or just a potential candidate, or even just as a parent or friend coming to see whoever at the office, it is right there front and center. And I think it was received very well because there were a lot of, for the people that did participate, there were emails like that followed and saying, you know, how can I be supportive? You know, thank you for sharing your story. And, you know, it led to more people feeling comfortable about coming out in the workplace. And so, you know, that's one thing that we did that I kind of pioneered at Bounce X. It was really touching and kind of led to a lot of other opportunities to be inclusive.
Thank you. Yeah, that is very pioneering. I haven't actually heard of an organisation doing that before as well. And Dawn, so what initiatives have you pioneered or have been part of that have been well received or successful?
Yes. Well, as a member of the Emerge ERG, I helped really pioneer the cross-pollination of the Emerge, our LGBTQ affinity group, with our women's affinity group.
Thanks for the question.
I think that might be my accent, Sean and Dawn.
Oh,
I know, that's fine.
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm glad. Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, that's good.
That is okay. So Dawn, would you like me to repeat the question? Dawn, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I caught that. My internet was struggling a little bit, so I've switched to a different connection. Hopefully this is going to be better. Hopefully you can hear me. So I wanted to touch back on a point that someone made earlier about retention, and retention is absolutely a key metric with inclusivity, but retention is kind of the last metric you want to have to measure. There may well be people who are not feeling included while still at the company, who may be staying for other reasons despite the lack of inclusivity. So something I'm probably most proud of is a diversity and inclusion survey that we ran across 400 people in the London office. It took us a lot longer to run than we would have liked. And I can see at least one other member of the team who worked so hard on that survey in this Zoom right now. And the company was very nervous about the legal ramifications of running an anonymous survey that was asking people for some quite personal information. So we ran it in London as a trial, and that was a couple of years ago now. And it threw up an awful lot of interesting insights. We discovered that the term we use in the UK is Black and Minority Ethnic, BAME. We discovered that many of those staff members were feeling less included, and especially Black staff members, and that led to the formation of a support network for Black colleagues and a really successful celebration of Black History Month as well, which we managed to get quite a significant budget for. and then that's led to a sort of permanent ERG as well, which our Black staff members now have a collective voice. So and we could rely on data for that and show that data to management as well. So I was quite pleased with that. It was far too much harder work than it should have been, but we got there.
Fantastic, thank you. And Amy, the same question. Would you like me to repeat the question again?
No, thank you. I've got it. I just want to thank the other panelists for sharing all those amazing initiatives. They were inspiring, and now my head is filling up with ideas of things I can take home with me. I wanted to call out 2 initiatives, and I'll preface it by saying that CLIC has done a number of big, extravagant things for Pride, but the initiative I really wanted to call out is something that was smaller in scale, but so very powerful. And it was for last year's International Day of Trans Visibility. And it was a call out on the intranet to please add your pronouns to your profile, and explaining that updating your pronouns is a small action that goes a long way in showing your support and allyship with the trans community. And so to support that, we filled up the agency with these stickers that said, hello, my pronouns are, and you could put it on your laptop as you carried it around the agency. And it was amazing. And about, I think it was 400 or 500 employees actually went and put their pronouns on the internet, which was great. A more immediate initiative that I've been spearheading for this very critical moment that we're in is an anti-racism initiative. And it's conceived as an interactive program of speakers and book readings, like book clubs in small groups and movies, so that you get inspired by the speakers and then have the opportunity to interrogate the ideas and, you know, bring them into your life in these book groups. And we're kicking it off next month with the queer author Ijeoma Oluo, and then a reading of her book, So You Want to Talk About Race. So enormously excited about that.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And now if we go on to, oh, actually, I'll come back to you again, actually, Amy. Now we just wanted to talk a little bit more about how are initiatives still recognizing exclusivity programs through isolation? Mm-hmm. So what business has been doing to continue to promote an inclusive work environment during the pandemic?
Yeah. You know, it's been really interesting, and I'd be curious to know if some of the other panelists have had this experience as well. But there's almost been a bit of a silver lining to the shutdown. And by that I mean, you know, our employee resource groups had been fairly event focused and celebration focused up till now. And there had always been talk about, you know, becoming more comprehensive and going beyond events. But of course, once you shut everything down, you really do have to go beyond events. And what we saw is that the Slack channels for the ERGs became places of vibrant and lively discussions and really a locus of activity. And I think that set up particularly our ERG for employees of color to really show enormous leadership when it came to this Black Lives Matter moment and really lead the way in some steps that the agency needs to take.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, a client meeting that I'd went on just before we went into lockdown, but we'd already started putting, I suppose, processes in place, if you will. Had also discussed the beauty of Slack. And actually now we're building a community from, you know, New York to San Francisco, where you may not have been able to do that before. So there is certainly a silver lining in some instances. And Leanna, so would you be able to talk a little bit more about how you've seen initiatives being recognized within inclusivity programs through isolation as well, and what you think that businesses have been doing to promote an inclusive environment during the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak to a few. So Booz Allen has been doing a fair amount of like virtual hangouts, some of the um, virtual hangouts, webinars, panels like this one. And also, I know recently I participated in the creation of a Pride video where they were doing videos of all the employees at home, and then they're going to put them together into like a compilation, which I think is going to look really cool. On the volunteering side, Out in Tech has been doing a ton of virtual events. It's a organization that brings together the LGBTQ community in tech. And so a lot of their things were in person and event focused. And as soon as the pandemic happened, they started just creating, like asking all the volunteers to just like, whatever you want to do, like we'll make it an event, we'll put it on. I recently joined in, I was sort of taking a break from event planning, and recently I joined in to help with creating a mental health support group for Black people who are being affected right now. And so that's been well received. And lastly, with OSTEM, they started, like I was also part of this, we all created like a ton of crisis resources for our members who are all, OSTEM is a very collegiate-based organization, and so since a lot of students were going home and, you know, being LGBTQIA, they may not be accepted by their family, we worked pretty diligently to put together like a sort of virtual network. We had a crisis hotline that we put together. We culminated resources from each state, and we made those available to members. So I saw a lot of work come out of the pandemic in terms of like keeping it together, and it was really awesome.
Fantastic, thank you. And especially at the crisis line, that would be a fantastic thing to continue when we can return back to normal, where people may not feel comfortable necessarily before as well. And excellent, Dawn. Yeah, the same question to you as well.
Can you repeat the question so I get the answer?
Absolutely. I thought I was going to ask, but I thought maybe not this time, but I will, absolutely. So how are initiatives still recognising inclusivity programmes through isolation? And what have your business been doing to continue to promote an inclusive work environment?
So at the start of lockdown, some departments in my company adapted better than others, but overall I think we struggled quite a lot in the early days to just stay connected with our individual teams. I work in tech. Tech has probably found it a little bit easier than some of the other parts of the business, which are highly relationship focused and you know, paper based. And I think once we got on top of that, it was the very, very unfortunate timing of the events where the Black Lives Matter movement became, you know, headline news for everybody. And being in the music industry, this especially resonated. I think that the music industry has risen up in protest, and we are in the we have gone to town on the employee resource groups, which before were quite local, but now there's a really global feel. I think one of the silver linings to isolation is that it equalizes across geographical regions. And so we've been able to form a global diversity and inclusion council. And our management team, who would maybe previously speak to the people within their confines of their office, are now speaking equally to people across all of our different offices, time zones allowing. So there's a much more global feel to our D&I efforts now, and I think Zoom and technologies like it do help with that. It gets you out of that habit of only talking to the person next to you, which is not a particularly inclusive attitude for a global company. And so I do think that's really that's really helped us to look across all of our staff members, not just the ones near you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that I've felt. I've been talking to people in some of our offices in the Middle East and things like that as well, and it's just not something that I necessarily would have done probably prior to lockdown too. So yeah, Elizabeth,
yeah,
I'll over to you now.
Thank you everyone for sharing your insight and all the amazing initiatives that you're part of. Laquan, did you raise your hand? Did you want to add something on there, or did I?
That was me.
I did raise my hand. So I wanted to, times to what Amy was saying about how, D&I was really focused around a lot of events, and how that has now shifted to Slack and internal communications. I think that the shift is now kind of focused on, originally when it first started, we started thinking about the parents, the employees that had parents at home, that had children at home, that were trying to do, and their job, and then also just kind of like manage their children. And so we kind of did a work with the learning and development team to kind of put something together to support the parents. Also in quarantine, not everyone was privileged to be stuck in the house. If not everyone had a safe environment. And so we really put a focus on like mental health and resources available. If you don't feel safe with your roommate or your partner, or, if you, want to do some type of meditation, we offered like yoga throughout the week, and just encourage people to really take time off. And so, the ERG started to shift to more of an education and a supportive piece, versus like what we used to do in the office, which is, education, but had, a social component to it as well, a physical social component. So yeah, I think that when we come back to whatever the new normal is, like we will, I think we realize that Slack and internal communication is super important. And because we had the physical space, we didn't really invest too much in that. And now we will probably find a really good balance of the two.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's great that we can all be connected whenever, but it's almost, how many Zoom calls are we all doing? It's almost like the tech is too much sometimes, but it's definitely great, that we can all kind of still come together and have conversations like this. And Laquan, I want to kind of bring it back to you and kind of shift the focus in terms of our conversation a bit more personally to some of our panelists that we have today. So in terms of kind of crucible moments that some of us might have experienced in the workplace, what would you say has been a moment for you when you felt like your identity was tested, and how did you overcome or approach that situation?
So I would say the moment for me is I used to actually go by my middle name, which is Terry. And, the moment where I felt like my identity was tested was whether I'm going to go by Terry when I apply to jobs, or actually use my first name, and essentially I ended up using my first name. I used that moving forward. But that was a very scary moment because Terry was my bit of armor to kind of like protect myself from the ignorance that exists out there in the world. People couldn't really identify what my race was by using Terry. And so being a D&I manager, I think it's super important to kind of be your true self, because you're asking people to do that. You're having conversations where people are being very vulnerable. And so I said to myself, I'm not able to really ask that of people if I'm not able to give that myself. And so I had to kind of take down that wall and really kind of come out and just say, hey, this is my first name. This is why I use my middle name. But, regardless, now I'm real focused on being a part of an organization that accepts me for who I am. And I'll just deal whatever negative consequences come with that, even though there shouldn't be. But, we still have work to do, and sometimes there are. And so I think that was a moment where my identity was questioned of like, how do I want to go about this next opportunity? Do I want to kind of go in disguise and just like still be true to myself and keep that to me? Or do I just want to be, my real self? And so I think a lot of a lot of people do that, right? Where they, try to change their names. And we want to kind of change that culture. We want to change that thinking of, being true to yourself. I mean, I think there's a lot of research on when you bring your true self to work, like you're a lot more productive. You know, you have the psychological safety when you're doing your job, and produces a lot of better results. So yeah, that would be my moment. And, you know, when I did share that with my company during a Black History Month panel, even a lot of recruiters that knew me as Terry, like, questioned the way that they were actually recruiting, and if they had their own bias. So I think it was like super impactful and well received.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely resonates, I think, with both B and myself. Being a recruiter, I've seen that time and time again. You know, people put the name how they want to be perceived for fear of judgment, and not actually being their true selves when it comes to kind of getting the job and doing the employment verification. So I think it's important, you know, I'm glad that you shared that story, because a lot of people are still kind of doing that and they're afraid to be themselves. And I know, Danny, I think that you also have a moment that you'd like to share when you felt like your identity was tested.
Yeah, it relates quite a bit. Also just has to do with applying to jobs. Over and over again, when I'm applying for work, they ask me to identify if I'm a man or a woman. And those are the only options I'm given. And as someone who identifies as trans and like feels like very proud of my trans identity, and it's important for me to know that my trans identity is something that I don't have to oversimplify into a binary spectrum in any given company I'm working in, is so important to me. And so I find myself in this situation where it's like, so do I not apply? Do I just pick one and then explain it in the interview? It's really a tough thing. I've also, like, I so appreciate Laquan, like, bringing up how important it is to be true to who you are at work. I think, like, yeah, working in support groups for the trans community, there's a lot of conversations about whether or not to be out at work, if people even have that privilege. Like, even being able to make that decision is in its own way a privilege. But the reality is if you don't feel like you can be honest about who you are and how you identify in your given workspace, that's going to impact your ability to show up on so many different levels. So yeah, it's a tester for sure. I haven't really figured out the answer to that question, but I'm grateful for folks that take the time to really think about the application process and advocate for, you know, options that are inclusive of trans identities.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it comes back to why it's so important that companies are now focused on D&I policies and actually putting in place versus just having a committee, which kind of ties into more the social activities. Yeah, I think that's so important. And Sean, I think, I know you wanted to share as well. Let me know if you want me to repeat the question.
No, yeah, absolutely. So a moment where I feel like my identity was being tested. Yes, I feel like that right now. I feel like my identity is being tested right now in a way that I've never really quite experienced before. Because right now here in New York City, we have, well, around the world, we have 3 massive tidal waves of crises, all like just converging all at once on us right now. And I really have to ask myself, if I'm not supporting my community, where do I really belong and fit in? So I've participated in several Black Lives Matter demonstrations here in New York City, and I've been so moved by just all of the outside support and just everyone who's showing up and being seen. And it wasn't really until I saw coverage of the All Black Lives Matter sign on Hollywood Boulevard in LA. And if anyone here hasn't seen that yet, I highly encourage everyone to go and look at that. It's so beautiful. It was probably one of the most beautiful symbols of expression of everything that I am that I've seen. And that's when everything just kind of clicked for me in this moment right now, that I really belong to both of these groups, and it really highlighted my intersectionality and where I fit in there. And it really just kind of brought me to tears. All Black lives do matter, and I felt so seen.
Definitely. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, and I think I'm in New York as well, as we discussed, and literally 5 minutes from my apartment at McGarren Park, there is a movement happening every single night at 7 p.m. So people keep showing up.
Yeah.
It's not stopping, which is great. And yeah, definitely support that. Thank you.
And also in Austin too. Austin also on Congress Avenue, and it is so powerful. You just feel like a real energy of like collaboration when you're there and everyone kind of doing things together. So it's really fantastic to see too.
Before I move on, does anyone else, I just want to let anyone else, if they want to chime in and answer, feel free to, because I know we're directing some of the questions.
I just wanted to return back to the point that Danny was made about, you know, specifying gender and on application forms. And I guess for me, if I have anything to do with the recruitment process or any kind of information gathering exercise at work, the first question I ask is, why are you capturing gender? I think that's important. It's important that the people capturing that information have a good reason for it, and perhaps there's a wonderful D&I reason for capturing that gender. Brilliant. Okay, well, make that clear and give people, like Danny says, give people the options that they need. And if you know, we always included a free text self-identification field on anything with gender options. But I would always urge people doing recruitment to think hard about the information you're capturing, the demographic information, and make sure you're going to put it to good use before you even bother to ask somebody. That doesn't just go for gender.
Definitely. Thank you, Dawn. As an agency, that's not a question that we ask. Some of our clients might, but we certainly do not ask that question for a good reason. And coming back to you, Dawn, actually, I did want to ask you, and I know we have touched on this before, so I'm really grateful that you're happy to share it again with everyone who's joined us. So a lot of the LGBTQI+ community have a coming out story. Would you say that it's different for today's Gen Zers? Can you talk about how perhaps you also think that technology and media might have changed this moment?
Well, I can only really truly speak for myself. I can give second, third-hand information about how other people, perhaps older people than me, have found the experience of coming out, whether they were coming out with sexuality or coming out with a gender. For me, I never really came out about my sexuality. It just sort of became me. I never lied to anybody. But my gender, I came out at Cobalt. I converted from contractor to permanent. And when I finished my contract, I spoke to the head of recruitment at the time, who was trying to convince me to come back as a permanent employee. And I said, look, this is what I'm going through right now. And do I come back to the same company in my new identity, or do I go somewhere else and turn up there? And I was far through my transition. At the time, my confidence was lower, my physical appearance was different, and I'll be forever grateful to him for you know. And he's comes from the least underrepresented demographic group you could imagine, and he was just so gentle and so welcoming, and he listened to me, and that was what made me take the job in the end. And over to the technology part of things, I came out to the first few people at work face to face, my boss, etc. And it was really nerve-wracking for both of us, actually. And I think when you come out to somebody who already knows you about something as extreme as gender, that person is going to be surprised, and they're going to go through some facial expressions, and that was difficult for me, because I didn't want to see those facial expressions. I didn't want to see that shock. I was, you know, my confidence was not great, and it was really difficult. And so I, for the people I knew slightly less well, I wanted to come out to people one-to-one. I didn't want some group email. That wasn't my style. That's fine for some people, but not for me. And so I used Slack. I didn't want to spend hours answering the same questions over and over again, so I wrote a one-page PDF document, which was a kind of basic FAQ, and at the bottom it contained links to articles about allyship and how to cope with this kind of situation. And I came out to maybe 1 or 2 people every day for about 3 months on Slack. It was exhausting, but I didn't have to go through that that sequence of facial expressions and that variety of responses. People could have that time, even if it's just a few seconds, to give their response, and it was so much easier for me. And I got an awful lot of feedback saying that it was easier for them as well to use that medium, and that wouldn't have been available in the work environment a few years ago. And so I'm really grateful for that. And with respect to attitudes, I think that's a very different question to technology. Of course, attitudes are changing. Sometimes it feels like the attitude towards trans people now is the same as the gay rights movement that the gay people were experiencing back in the 1980s. If you look at the headlines of the newspapers, certainly in the UK, it's almost identical. Slightly different subject matter, but there are generations. But now it's TV is full of gay people and they're celebrated, and it's wonderful. TV's not so full of trans people yet, but I have confidence because of the struggle of people before us, and I'm super grateful. I have confidence that in that maybe that amount of time it'll be the same with trans people. But that proliferation of communication technology brings people together and puts a little bit of distance to allow people to get used to that new feeling of seeing someone differently.
Thank you, Dawn.
Anyway.
For sharing your personal story. I think, Danny, did you raise your hand? Did you?
Yeah, just wanted to offer a quick shout out to it's titled Disclosure. It's a documentary that was just released on Netflix, and it talks about trans representation in the media. It really centers voices of BIPOC trans folks. To speak to Sean's point earlier, like recognizing also the intersectionality really impacts the way that different folks are perceived and also represented in the media. And it speaks about the how the increased visibility of trans folks in the media in recent years has actually had a complicated impact, because it's leading to more folks coming out, which, when it's not bolstered by policy that supports and protects BIPOC trans communities, ends up leading to an increase in crimes and violence. And so, yeah, I think it's important to kind of think about all of the ways that these things interplay, and just big recommendation to go check it out. Just incredible documentary.
Awesome. I'll definitely check that out. Thank you, Danny. And then, Dawn, I did want to direct a question to you. So in terms of, not Dawn, Leanna, in terms of, again, in terms of the workplace, was there a time for you when you have had your sexual identity or preference was called into spotlight with coworkers or with clients?
Yeah, so originally when I looked at this question, I was thinking more along the lines of my gender identity. Is it okay to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it happens all the time. So I when I was thinking about how I would answer this, there's like so many examples, but I'll go kind of like high level. So the only thing harder than like being a Black engineer is being a Black trans engineer. When I joined the tech field, so originally my background is in communications and HR. When I joined the tech field, what I found was that, like, when I would join companies, I'd get a lot of messages from other Black employees who were like, "Oh my gosh, I've never met like a Black woman in tech. This is amazing." And I was just like, "Okay, so I got to tell you something," and so there was a lot of having to come out in those respects, and I would have supervisors who, it was really strange, initially would be very open. When I worked in blockchain, I had a supervisor who I was like, "Hey, I sort of came out during my interview, but I don't think you got it, so I'm just going to be very frank, and like, this is me, these are my pronouns." And he was like, "Oh, I don't really know what that means. Could you create a training?" And that was how I created the Exploring Gender Beyond the Binary. But what I found after was that I guess he just like wasn't as accepting as he seemed, because a few months after that, he started to just like sort of make offhanded comments around like folks who use they them pronouns, and I was just like, what? Like I literally was just coding, and out of nowhere he was like, I don't really, and I was like, what? I'm interviewing people actively for this job who use those pronouns. I can't have you say those things you're making. So and so I found a lot of that. I think there's just like a lot that needs to be done. It's why I do a lot of the work that I do. It's really difficult being able to sort of just like be there, be myself, and be able to work when I feel like I constantly have to like either correct people or just like allow myself to be seen and exist in the workplace in a way that's comfortable for me. It's sort of like the whole thing with quarantine and isolation is a little bit ironic, because when I moved from HR to tech, I had initially done it so I could work from home, because at home, like, I can be my full self. My dog does not misgender me, and it's wonderful. There's a bathroom I can use without being stared at, and it, like, I just felt such a shift, like, in my mental health when we started working from home full time, and I was like, oh, that's the amount of work I've been doing unconsciously, just trying to like exist. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Yana. And I mean, yeah, that is a point, right? We kind of get that more privacy when we've been able to work from home, and you're not conscious or worried about other people. I think, Sean, as well, did you want to share your story on this subject?
Yes, I did actually. Yes. So when I looked at the question, my answer was a bit more fun, I guess. Not more fun, sorry, just fun. So in my time here at Viacom CBS, this time last year, my team threw me a surprise World Pride themed birthday party, and it was incredible. It was probably the gayest birthday party I've ever seen. It was incredible. And I felt a bit like a unicorn, because before my time here in New York, I worked at agencies in Dallas and Las Vegas. And I always just kind of felt like I really couldn't bring my full self, kind of to be honest point, to work, to be fully seen. And with my team doing this, I felt so fortunate to be surrounded and supported by such a diverse team around me, that I just felt so seen. And I want to juxtapose that to how I felt about myself 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I would have been absolutely devastated if I knew my boss back in Texas, I knew my boss knew, or my coworkers knew, like, my full gender and sexual orientation. And up until last week, I could have lost my job for it, right? So that's just been a really great example of my experiences in a way that I've kind of learned from this more inclusive, working in a more inclusive space, of how I've grown more my time here, just professionally and personally.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time because we only have about 4 minutes left, and I did want to make sure we at least got, and I know, Dawn, you're in the UK and it's eating into your evening. I did want to try and get one question from the audience, and someone who has actually been kind of editing their question. So if I can put it out, and then each of you, feel free to sort of answer. So question for the panel. This is, sorry. What can we do about people at senior management level, i.e. CEOs, CTOs, etc.? Sometimes I feel their support is superficial and they are not educated enough about the different aspects of diversity. However, we need them to lead by example. Also, they look too busy to have enough time to learn.
Yeah.
Leanna, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things is, at the end of the day, like, the person has to be willing. And I think that if you can't get it at the CEO level, like, get it all the people around the CEO, right? And so that work has to be done by those around, because once you know, the CEO looks around, oh, everyone's doing this training, like I should definitely be doing this training. One of the things I've really enjoyed about working at Booz Allen is that every like our employee resource group is called Globe Plus. Every like really big or sometimes even small events that we've done, including virtual events, the CEO has shown up, and not only shown up, but like spoken. I'm on a panel later this afternoon, and the CEO will be there not as like a guest or anything, but literally just to be there to learn. And I feel like that sort of demonstration of allyship or being an accomplice, which is the new terminology, I feel like that is such a like it's a great way of demonstrating, and it's the hope is that, like, you know, the Booz Allen CEO is doing this, then, you know, other employees of other companies are like, well, what's my CEO doing? And they can bring this example of like, hey, he's being an ally, he's doing the work.
Thank you, Liliana. Does anyone else want to comment on the question?
I think, you know, getting buy-in from C-level, I think what you have to do is essentially kind of understand what their goal is, what their mission is, and then kind of either coach them or get them to understand how they can achieve that through diversity and inclusion. And so that, you know, you guys are aligned, and, you know, that they understand that their partnership is necessary. You know, I don't know some of the other industries, but I know that, like, in tech, you know, if there is a, you know, company that's our rival or in our industry and they're doing something related to D&I, and they're sharing their data, I will gladly say, hey, you know, this is what the competitors are doing. We should be doing something similar to that or even better than that. And so that's one way to kind of get buy-in. And it's really just, you know, picking your battles and really kind of giving them the space to know that they can make mistakes, so that they're able to kind of just like learn. Some of them want to kind of keep this idea that, you know, they should know everything. And if they come in and they don't, it looks like people look at them less. I think once you kind of remove that, that allows them to kind of be vulnerable and learn more and then get more buy-in.
Thank you, Laquan. We do have a couple more questions, so I don't know how hard everyone is on time in terms of the speakers. I have definitely one more for you. Dawn, there is one for you, so if you do have to hop off, I can ask you now.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. So Dawn, directed at you, you spoke about the D&I survey and were worried about the legal ramifications and that it was hard. What are some of the roadblocks that you can speak to, and how did you overcome them? What learnings did you get from that, which you knew before you started this initiative? How would you advise other companies to implement this as well?
So first, I wanted to start answering this question by referring to what some of the other panelists have been talking about, which is about getting the senior management team on board. And, you know, it may not be the CEO. Let's face it, most CEOs don't come from underrepresented demographic backgrounds. So one thing I've always valued is finding a sponsor within the senior management team. If you're lucky, that person may either be a staunch ally or may come from an underrepresented background themselves, so have some direct empathy. And finding a sponsor and getting them to speak for you at the board meetings and stuff, I think is a good first step, because then you have a seat at the table. We had to scale down our ambitions slightly from a global survey of over 700 people in, I think, 8 different jurisdictions to just being London to start with. I think that was a wise move, and it allowed us to proceed. We talked an awful lot with US legal counsel and UK legal counsel, and there are different employment laws around confidentiality in those different jurisdictions. And there's probably even state level jurisdictional differences. One of the big challenges we had was the worry that if somebody disclosed some particular piece of information on what was supposed to be an anonymous survey, we would be, depending on the jurisdiction, we would be legally required to break that anonymity. The example that was given was reporting of a sexual assault, which in a survey about inclusion, you can imagine that may have been a free text answer that was given. I'm quite proud of our UK management team for taking a very deep breath and going ahead with the London version of that survey, despite that worry. But it was a great worry for all of us at the time. Luckily, none of that happened. I would also refer back to, I think it was Laquan's answer about showing your senior management team what the competitors are doing. I held up Monzo, which is a bank in the UK. They're not our competitors in the industry, but as a tech company, they're definitely a competitor of ours. And Monzo did a wonderful big set of blog posts about their own survey, and I could show that as inspiration. Say, look, other tech companies we want to be like are doing this. So just get that sense of competition, I think is important. But yeah, the final challenge was around the different answers that people would have to give in different geographical regions. So the answer for ethnicity is going to be very different in the UK, where we're interested in very different ethnic groups than you might be, say, in the US or another country. So shrinking it down to a manageable size for the first iteration is something I can definitely recommend. And once you've done it once, we're now talking about maybe doing a global one, perhaps next year. So I hope that's helped. That you'll have your own personal challenges that are relevant to you and your company, but those are the ones that we experienced, and that's how we got around them.
And if I could just build on something that the picture that the panelists have been created, you know, in terms of getting buy-in from senior management, we are in a very unique historical moment right now where issues that some of us have been dealing with for a long time are suddenly becoming urgent and visible to those who have had the privilege of not thinking about them. And so I think it's an opportunity for companies who maybe haven't been as active in diversity, equity, inclusion, for the employees to come together and use their voice to demand some changes.
Thank you. Thank you both. And then I did have a question actually quickly just directed at you, Amy, which just based on your background with marketing, what would you say some of the best practices in marketing to LGBTQ+ consumers are?
You know, I think the first one is probably make sure your house is in order and to walk the walk. And what I mean by that is the community is very informed and very aware. So if you are going to ask for LGBTQ+ dollars, you need to make sure that your employee policies are supportive of them. You need to make sure that your senior leadership hasn't been on Twitter with homophobic or transphobic kind of commentary. Make sure that you can pull it all the way through the line. I think another one, and I'm going to pick up a theme that Danny and Sean have spoken to, is take intersectionality into account. So be diverse and be inclusive and make sure that your efforts include people of color and people of all age groups, and don't have a narrow view of you know, what it means to market to LGBTQ+ people. And then I think maybe the most critical is to make sure that your efforts are insight driven and strategic, and not including any stereotypes. That's really key. Authenticity is valued, and the lack of it is going to be seen right through and can really backfire. And if you don't have the internal resources to do that, then work with LGBTQ+ media and let them be your guide. And you know what, that's important enough to say a second time, because even if you do have internal resources, support LGBTQ media, because the media landscape is really tough and they're doing critical work.
Absolutely, that's so true. And Leanna, I think you'd raised your hand to add on to that.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked, and it's an example that I've seen, is this idea. So we talk about inclusion, and one of the things I like about inclusion is celebration. And so for Booz Allen, when I had started, I noticed a lot of their advertising had people that I knew were part of the queer community, but it wasn't like queer specific advertising. It was just like, these are people who work here. They're now a stock photo. And when I had started, the brand marketing director, was like, hey, we're going to put you in a bunch of photos. And I was like, oh, okay. And it wasn't like we're trying to force diversity. It's literally like, hey, like, we want to continue to celebrate your identity, and we're also not going to just make it about your identity. Like, you're more than that, but we're also celebrating that. And I thought that was like, it felt so authentic. It didn't feel forced, and it was a great thing that I wish more companies would adopt.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Leanna. So yeah, I know we've run over, so definitely unless anyone kind of has any final thoughts that you kind of really wanted to touch on, then B and I just wanted to say thank you to all of our amazing speakers. Some of you I know were a little last minute, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and your evening. So thank you, Danny, Dawn, Lakwana, Leanna, Amy, and Sean. And if anyone who's attended today does have any additional questions, then please do direct them to B or I. And yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
California, they're great.
Thank you.
Take care.